Morning, everyone, and welcome to the May 20th meeting of the Citizen Oversight Board. It's been almost a month since we last met, and excited to have some good discussion today, both with the sheriff and then also get the thoughts and ideas from our board members who were able to visit some of the Denver Detention Center facilities, and excited to kind of have some conversation about that. So first, I wanted to welcome our newest board member, Nick Weber, who is joining us for the first meeting today. Nick, if you want to say something about yourself, go ahead.
Sure. So hello, everyone. I think I've met almost everybody on here. Like Julia said, my name is Nick Weber. I'm an attorney at the Colorado State Public Defender's Office. I've been in their Denver trial office since 2014. Grew up in the Denver metro area, but did law school in California, worked legal aid and criminal defense in California for a while before coming out here, but very excited to be a member of the board and excited for next steps.
Thanks. And Nick is joining us because Katina is departing us. So just wanted to spend a little time saying thank you to Katina. I think we said a thank you at your resignation, but that was like 6 months ago. So let's do it again if we can. The first thing is just thank you for your ongoing and, many year leadership on the COB and in issues with police and public safety reform. You've been a really impactful member of the board and an important member of our community. So just wanted to say thank you for all of your service. It's been a pleasure sitting on this board with you and getting to know you and seeing just the thoughtful insight and leadership that you bring to all the issues that we address. So thanks again. If other board members would like to say something, I'll open the floor.
I was just going to say, oh, go ahead, Stefan.
No, I'll be brief. Sorry. I just want to echo everything Julia said. She's absolutely right about the thoughtfulness that you have brought to this, to this role. And, we are much better. We are a much better board with you. We will, but I know that you also have an able replacement as well, but we will miss you very, very much.
I echo those sentiments, having worked with Katina for years. She has been, the OIM, I can't say how much we appreciate everything that you've done to help us, support us, and make us better. Katina, you will be missed. I keep in touch. We wish you only the best for the future. And again, we can't thank you enough for everything you've done to help and support us. And I know you're going to go on to do great things, but as you already have done. So, but thank you. Thank you so much. And keep in touch.
Thank you for always having the community's best interest in mind. I know this board has changed so much because of you. And then again, giving back to the community because of all your service on the board. You've just always handled everything with such empathy and delicacy and compassion. And I know that will be missed. So just thank you.
I could say something poignant, but I won't. Bye, Tina. You be able to get away from me. I'll see you at the park walking that dog or something. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you know where to find me. You all do.
I appreciate the fact that you've kept us on track, through the years that I have had the pleasure of working with you, and the ability to watch you gracefully, call folks to task. That will stay with me. I appreciate your legal mind.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Welcome.
Wow, I moved. Thank you. I don't have anything prepared. I I really was nervous. I didn't even really want to do this, but it's nice to see Nick joining the board and stepping into the role. So there's another lawyer to help Stefan. Yeah, it's been an honor to do this work. You know, it's a small board. When I was so naive when I joined, and to have been a part of some really impactful changes for our community, appreciating that really for civilian oversight to be effective, it has to be community driven, but that there really does need to be some intention, some strategy, some effort around you know, directing the organization towards change that is staying change, because we've done it in a way that we're communicating and engaging with all of the stakeholders in the process, including people like Sheriff Diggins. So yeah, it's an interesting role, Nick. I think you're gonna have fun. I think you'll enjoy these people. They're wonderful. It's been really great. The board has changed its composition since quite a bit since when I joined, but I'm happy to hear that others think it's for the better as well. So good luck to you all moving forward. And yeah, like I said, you know where to find me, not far away.
Thank you. Thanks again. Okay, well, let's move into some board business with that smooth transition. If anybody has had a chance to review the minutes and if they feel that they're accurate, if I can have a motion to approve them.
So moved.
Great.
Second.
Great, thank you. All in favor, aye.
I,
Any opposed? Great, the motion passes. Okay, let's move into a quick update about board business. So short story is we have an agreement on the contract with our recruiting vendor. We were hoping to use today's executive session to collaborate with them. And then we learned that every person under the sun in the city needs to sign a contract before it becomes real. So we cannot start. And so we'll probably use our next meeting to do that because the mayor, the auditor, I mean, many people need to sign a document that is quite small in terms of the scope. So prevents corruption, but takes a long time. We're moving on that. As soon as we're signed, we will begin engaging the board, community members, the Office of the Independent Monitor, and public safety stakeholders to just do a refresh of those sort of intangibles that we're looking for in the next monitor. So we should ramp up here in the next couple of weeks, and sorry about the delay. So then moving on from that board business, at the same time, we'll announce the screening committee scratch that. Once we have signature, we will announce the firm that's going to be doing the work, and then we'll announce the members of the screening committee. And I'm really excited about all of the participants that we're going to be working with. Okay, let's transition to the main topic. And if one of our board members who visited the jail wants to sort of talk about that visit, what you saw, where you visited, and who was there, that would be awesome. And then, we can dive into some conversation with the sheriff. Don't all volunteer at once.
Hey, Nick, why don't you, if you don't mind, why don't you go
Sure.
ahead, since you've spent a lot of effort, with some questions about the jail. You have a lot of familiarity with it based on your work as a public defender and the like. So if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, I'm sorry.
No, that's great.
It might be, I think we'd all benefit from your insight.
Sure. So we were there a couple weeks ago, and it was Daniel, Karen, Larry, April, and I, along with one of the majors who runs the intake division. And we didn't do exactly a floor by floor walkthrough, but we did start in the basement, and we're able to see the very long hallway that goes from the detention center over to the courthouse. And then and actually learned from the major that during COVID, which I hadn't even occurred to me, but makes perfect sense when everyone was locked down and couldn't move, and there was not trustee participation in making sandwiches and food for people at the courthouse or laundry, that it was the sheriffs who were higher up in rank who were doing the laundry, making sandwiches, making sure everyone got fed because they could safely participate that in sort of a COVID protective area. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. We also then, I think Karen was talking about this a little bit earlier. We also were able to see the second floor where we saw people coming from court, where there were several people who were, I think, very understandably upset about what happened in court. And so we talked to the major a little bit about that. And then we were able to see several of the different pods, some of the pods, I guess, that were more designed for people really struggling with mental health issues. The medical pod where people are checked in on every 15 minutes and have an individual cell where they don't even have fixtures within the cell because of concerns about self-harm, et cetera. And then I think there were 4-man pods where one of the doctors from Denver Health, and I apologize, I forget his name, came out and talked to us about some of the programming that's available there to try to work with people who are really struggling with mental health and trying to get them into a place where they feel better about being in the larger 8-man pods in general population. So we did sort of a walkthrough of from the basement. I think we made it to the 3rd floor, and then it was pretty clear to us that the 4th floor and 5th floor were going to look similar. And so we kind of took a break from that point, but it was very fascinating. I really appreciated having more of a bird's eye view of day-to-day operations. The other thing I would say is we also did a walkthrough of the intake. And just by happenstance, while we were doing the intake walkthrough, somebody, it wasn't clear to us what happened, but someone had a medical situation. And so there were just a lot of staff there from either nurses or Denver Health or sheriffs, keeping everyone safe and checking on that individual. And then medical gurney was brought in for that person and did a walkthrough of that whole area, which looks incredibly busy at every moment of the day. And even back into records where there's a whole team of people on computers checking on writs and people coming in and out of the jail. So a very fascinating bird's eye view of day-to-day operations at the detention center. Julia, would you like me to ask questions or?
No, if there are any other board members who just, had reflections from that, you're welcome to share those. Otherwise, we can move on to questions.
I guess I would just add that we did get to go through the facility and see a lot of it. There was some pieces that towards the end, I asked some questions about like food. We didn't get to see much of like the access to food that that people have, like the ordering list or whatever that is. I was I just had never I'm not at all familiar with the facility, but we also learned that like people pretty much eat in the space that they're in. There's not like a cafeteria or anything like that it seemed like they were going to, but food is brought to them. But yeah, I guess that's what I would add around access to health, to food.
I just want to add that Captain Adcock, who's the person who led the tour for us, I thought she was she did a really good job in taking us to various areas in the jail and answering all our questions. She spent a lot of time with us, and so I think we appreciated that.
Thanks. So Sheriff, welcome. Thank you again for facilitating the tour with the board. Really appreciate that. And, hope you're enjoying this about to be snowy Friday. I'm glad to see you again. So for public attendees to this meeting, we submitted some questions to the sheriff in advance. And some of them are sort of longer questions. So maybe I'll read them, Sheriff, and then if you want to answer, we'll go through a few of them, and then hopefully there's additional board member questions that we can go through. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
And do you have any remarks that you'd like, opening comments you'd like to make before we dig into the questions?
Yes, I don't see Katina on the screen anymore.
You dropped off.
Certainly want to thank her for the many years of service that she gave on the board. She's always been someone who was a thought partner and certainly helped us as an agency and the Department of Safety as a whole do better when it came to the folks that we're serving. So just want to thank her. I also want to thank the men and women of the Denver Sheriff's Department for all of the work that they performed. The uniform and professional staff do a fantastic job. Last year we had 20,000 people come through our system, and every single day they showed up to work. So just extraordinary performance by our staff, and want to give a special shout out to our performance management and innovation team, who provided me with the data that I'm going to be sharing with you today, along with our employee outreach program, who did as well. They stepped up when I sent those questions over to them. They were very responsive in getting the information that I'll be talking about today. And Larry, you asked about the additional food that folks can order. That is referred to as commissary. So in addition to the meals that we serve, folks can order food off the commissary list. And Captain Adcock is one of the best folks in our organization. Being as young as she is, I anticipate that she'll be continuing to move up and help to lead our organization. So we're very happy to have her on board as well. So glad you all had a great visit with her.
Thanks. So first question is, the board met with one of the doctors that runs a mental health focused housing pod known as 3B. That doctor discussed various aspects of treatment and moving inmates from single cell to multiple bed pods and their efforts to assist them with individual and group therapy. The board was interested in your thoughts on if you consider these efforts successful or worth the work. Are you seeing outcomes you were hoping for from this approach? And if you think it's successful, tell us why.
Great question. I not only believe that they're successful, I think they're also necessary. As people enter our custody, sometimes they come in under mental distress, and those single cell environments may be helpful during their stay as we begin to get them stabilized and back on their medication and into programming. Our goal is to attempt to transition people into the multiple bed pods in general population, where they can access additional services and programming. I would consider them successful, as our goal is to prepare people not only to transition back into general population, but also 97% of the people that are in our custody are coming back to the community. So we want folks to leave us better than how they came to us, until that programming and that mental health care helps them to do that. So I do consider them both successful and necessary.
Thanks. Follow-up questions on that from the board?
I had just like a quick question. One of the things that I noticed about the 3B pod was individuals had access to maybe a radio, or they could listen to headphones or something like that. But then it seemed like maybe when they transition to general population, there isn't the bandwidth, or maybe I'm guessing, for them to be able to have radios in general population. So I'm just wondering if that's something that your organization is looking at, allowing general population to have access to radios, because it seemed like it was like, we're trying to help you get to general population, but then we're going to take away this extra thing that might help people stay calm while they're stuck in custody. That question makes sense.
Those headphones are really for folks that have mental health conditions. For those that sometimes are in psychosis, those headsets help to quiet the voices. and they are utilized in mental health pods across the nation. We are looking at expanding the opportunity for folks to have additional ways to listen to music. And in fact, we'll be going to City Council here in the next couple of weeks to introduce tablets to everyone that's in our custody, very similar to your cell phone, where you can listen to music, watch movies, utilize it as a telephone and other things. Jails across the nation are now introducing tablets. And so we'll be doing that and believe that it's going to be successful in the jails that we've visited across the nation. Programs like that are. So that's something that everyone that is in custody will have access to very shortly.
Sheriff, what's the timing on that? That was mentioned. I'm curious about what's the timing on providing tablets to all people in custody?
We have to go through the city council process. So we're currently working with the city attorney's office to ensure that the contract language is strong. Once it goes through the full city council process and is signed off by the mayor, the vendor that we use, which is Securus, has them ready to go. They're one of the largest vendors in the nation, so they have the tablets ready to distribute as soon as we have all of the signatures in place. So we anticipate that it's going to be this summer, Stefan.
Okay. Thank you. So all you have a full supply that's readily available?
Yeah, we're hoping to be able to offer them to every person that's in custody.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Is there a conception that maybe those would be used for, vocational or technical training as well? Okay, so there's opportunity for inmates to use those for learning.
Yeah, it goes beyond just the entertainment purposes. We actually have the ability to put things like job opportunities that folks may take advantage on there, as well as those educational opportunities as well. So they're very broad. In the same way that you have multiple apps on your phones, the tablets have the ability to do the same. So they're very, very robust.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, next question. During the visit, the board witnessed an inmate in emotional distress returning from a court appearance. We all understand how that is not uncommon, as you often receive, bad information or, negative information in that setting. So it's not uncommon for inmates to receive, potentially life-changing news while in your custody. What, if any, treatment or therapy option is available for someone after court to help them digest what's just occurred? Or the mental strain of court appearances. If there is treatment available, is it limited to folks in the mental health focused housing pod, or is that available to everyone, or, what's the scope of that?
Our chief of mental health services, Dr. Nikki Johnson, leads a very large team of mental health professionals that work at both of our jails. That includes psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health and behavioral health specialists, to include our newly formed crisis response team who work in the pods every day. So whenever someone returns, and it is not uncommon for folks to get bad news while they're in court, we have the ability to address their needs and their concerns immediately in a short-term way, but also in a long-term way as well. Those services are offered to all the people in our custody, regardless of where they're housed or their classification status. So anyone that comes back and needs those services, we stand at the ready to assist them.
Board questions on that?
Approximately what percentage of folks are availing themselves of those mental health services? I know that can vary during points in time, Sheriff, but do you have a feel for that?
I would say it varies, as you said, Stefan. When folks come back from court, some folks take advantage of those services. Some folks don't, but they're always available to them. The mental health team touches base with a great majority of our staff, as you all are aware. We have up to sometimes 50% of the people in our custody, which may have a mental health condition, some of them more severe than others, but our mental health team stands at the ready they're in the pods all day, every day. In addition, our nurses go to every single pod every single day. And if they see that someone is in mental distress, they may make a referral, as do our deputies that are working in those pods. It's one of the reasons that we focus on mental health for first responders, as well as our CIT programming. So everyone in our agency understands how important it is to address those needs and concerns.
Okay. Next question. Similarly, sheriff's deputies, of course, are exposed to trauma frequently. Maybe it's a distraught inmate or someone suffering from mental health issues or, a conflict with an inmate. What kinds of services are offered to the sheriff's deputies who work in the jails every day? And if programming isn't available, why might that be? And what would you like to see?
We have a very large program for employee outreach. In fact, we have staff who are specifically dedicated to the employee outreach program. I can tell you that in 2022, just this year alone, 19 sworn staff and 5 civilians have reached out or have been reached out to by our employee outreach program, and 20 of those employees have been referred to mental health resources. Those, of course, are confidential in nature, and so we want to ensure that we keep that in mind as we talk about this. We have peer support, which is deputies and other professional staff that reach out to our staff to help them through these things. We have guidance resources. We work with Nicoletti Flater and Associates to help our staff, and other programs like Badge to Badge, which is for uniformed staff specifically related to the work that we do in wearing uniforms and the impact that it has on your mental health care. In 2021, we also had 105 referral-based outreaches with our staff and provided a variety of professional services to them for their personal challenges, to include postpartum depression, parenting and relationship challenges, financial struggles, childcare issues. I mean, there are a lot of things that we know our staff goes through. So as they do this work in these environments, it is tough. And we want to make sure that we're taking care of our staff. We do a good job of doing that. And I think the mental health of our staff is and will continue to be a top concern for our agency.
Follow-up questions on that? So I have a general, and maybe it's data that you had your team gather. I think we know from various population groups that, there's a higher incidence of suicide and self-harm with folks right now. The past 2 years have been very challenging, or almost 3 years at this point. So, are you seeing that with folks who are in your custody and or your staff? Is that noticeable? Is there, any data that supports that, or are you not seeing that?
As far as our staff is concerned, I hesitate to say that we haven't had any of our staff take their lives in custody in the past year, but it is something that has happened in the past. It's something that I've had to go through while I've been in senior leadership in our agency, and it's tough across our industry. We know that we serve in a field where that is an occurrence. I just returned from the National Police Week in Washington, D.C., where over 600 names were added to the national wall for officers who gave their lives in the line of duty. Well, during those services, the names of the folks who also took their own lives that were in uniform were read. And I can tell you that there were a number of names that were read this year. It's very unfortunate, but it's a reality that we deal with, which is why we know how important the mental health care for our staff is, as well as the folks that are in our custody. We pay a lot of attention to suicidal ideation, and hopefully are taking every measure and step that we can to prevent that while people, are in our custody. But it's something that we do deal with.
Thanks. Okay, switching topics just a little bit. The board was shown the intake and process for searching people who come into custody in the jail. Are there issues with drugs or other contraband coming into the jail? Is there data on the frequency of drugs or other contraband being recovered at intake versus, recovered in the pods, et cetera? I'd also add, in the mail, any other in and out form that you've got.
Yeah, addiction doesn't stop when folks come into our custody. And we do deal with contraband and drug issues in our jail, as do other jails across the nation. It's one of the reasons that we have things in place such as canine narcotic dogs that specifically focus on finding those things, and our staff does a fantastic job of doing searches. We're also this year going to be looking at introducing some technology that we hope to reduce those incidents, because it is such a challenge for us. Over the past year, we have had 211 incidents of drugs being found in housing pods, to include intake pods or the intake area as well. There were 25 incidents of folks who came into custody that had drugs on them. The Denver Police Department does a great job about searching people, but sometimes people have drugs on them in places that may not be found on an initial search. And so it is something that we take great pride in trying to figure out while folks are coming in, to prevent them from going upstairs. Based on those averages and the data, our team estimates that we have about 0.6 times per day where drugs were found, which is about once every 2 weeks in our custody. It's something that we deal with, and our staff is trained to not only to find those narcotics, but also to respond when folks take them, and sometimes when they overdose while they're in our custody as well.
Okay, relatedly, what, if any, impacts do you anticipate the recently passed fentanyl bill will have on your operations or any other part of the work that you do?
Yeah, I, along with our department and the Department of Safety, were intimately involved in the mayor's efforts in trying to ensure that we're doing all we can to address the fentanyl epidemic that we're all in. The impact that we know that we're going to have it as an agency is, as folks are placed into custody for a fentanyl possession, we have to do more when it comes to helping them to get on medicated assisted treatment programs and do that in a more robust way. That's the reason that we have now created a medicated assisted treatment pod. What we did before was folks would come into our custody and be placed on those medications, and they would be in different areas throughout the jail. Well, we know that having a more targeted approach is going to be more effective for the people that are in our custody. And so by placing them in one specific pod, we can not only deliver the medication to them, but we can also increase the treatment that they're going to be provided. And as they transition back into the community, we can begin to focus on the handoff that they need to ensure that they stay on those medications when they go into the community. So the impact for us is knowing that there is likely going to be an increase after the legislation goes into effect, but we're ready, we're already prepared, and have already been talking about what we're going to do to help out with this problem that we're all dealing with in our community.
Follow up on that, because I think the MAT approach was launched just around the time that we met with you last. So is there anything you'd like to say more? I mean, obviously you just said some things about it already, but how many people are you seeing go through there? Is it working? Is it enough? Kind of give us the overview of how it's going so far.
Yeah, it's absolutely working. Dr. Johnson and her team are beginning to place folks in that pod. It can hold up to 64 people. We're also working through standing up an area for women as well, because we started the pilot with men, but we're also focusing on the women in custody. I think it has been successful as we continue to grow the program. We're doing everything we can to ensure that we're being thoughtful about it. And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, we went and visited a facility in Kenton County, Kentucky, which is Covington, Kentucky, the Kenton County Detention Center, where they have 70 people in one pod, in one of the most robust programs that I have ever seen across the nation doing MAT. And one of the benefits that they have is they have a lot of community support as those folks are transitioning, and everyone that was there in that pod was hopeful that as they transition into the community that they would be successful. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking to do. It's brand new, but I think we're already having successes and seeing that placing folks in those pods is allowing us to be more streamlined when it comes to the resources that we're providing to that population.
Sheriff, I'm preempting the next question a little bit that Julia's going to ask you about staffing. But what you've triggered for me anyway, to my mind, is staffing in particular in Dr. Johnson's mental health team. Since you've said that up to 50% of inmates can have, mental health issues and therefore either request or require services from her mental health team, what's the current situation with the staffing of Dr. Johnson's mental health team, and if it is a little deficient, what is your anticipation in terms of enhancing that staffing?
Dr. Johnson has actually been fortunate to have a very good response for mental health professionals who want to work in this environment. And as she begins to continue to build out the downtown detention center team, she's now looking to do the same at the county jail. So her team is almost complete at the DDC, and then we're going to start at the county jail. Our staffing is still hurting when it comes to uniform staff. Currently, we have about 623 positions filled for deputy sheriffs when our authorized strength is about 875. But I'm a glass half full thinker. We're doing everything we can to not only focus on recruitment, but also retention as well. Our staff knows how hard this environment is, and getting people to come and do this work has been a challenge, not just for the Denver Sheriff's Department, but for sheriff's departments and police departments across the nation. Last week, I also had an opportunity to sit down with the Major County Sheriffs of America organization, which I belong to, and also the Major County Chiefs of Police. And it is the #1 concern for law enforcement agencies across the nation, to include the Denver Police Department. Chief Payson talks about the struggles that they've had, but we're looking forward to the day when the community and folks who want to do this work begin to come in to this area. We currently have a class of 25 recruits that are in our academy. We have a July 11th academy that is starting, and we're hopeful to get 40 recruits into that area. So it's about recruitment and retention for our uniform staff. Bless you, Julia. Bless you. But as far as the mental health team is concerned, Dr. Johnson and her team are finding that there are folks in the mental health community that want to do this work, and they're excited about it as well. I've seen them in action. I've been on the floor and seen them going into the pods to talk to the people that are in custody. I've read reports where deputies are calling on them when folks are in crisis before they utilize other options, which is the reason that we hired that team. So for that mental health team, the crisis response team, they're doing well. Denver Health is also looking to ensure that all the positions that they have for mental health work is going to be filled. I think across the board, there are challenges with recruiting in all industries. You can't throw a rock anywhere in the city without seeing a help wanted sign. So things aren't perfect for us, but we're certainly hopeful that we can ensure that all these positions are going to be filled.
Thanks, Sheriff.
What might you say to a community member who's considering signing up but might have some reservations?
I would say to them that in the 28 years that I've been with this agency, I have no regrets about putting on this uniform. I'm from the community. I grew up in Montbello, as most of you know, and I think it's important that people from the community come to help serve the community. I think this is not a job, it's a career, it's a calling, and if you really want to give back and you believe in service and you want to work for a great agency that is getting better and that is headed in the right direction, consider the Denver Sheriff Department or any other agency in the Denver Department of Safety, to include the Denver Police Department, the Denver Fire Department, and I don't want to forget our partners at 911 because they're hurting for staffing as well. I think we really all have to emphasize to folks how important this work is, and it's something that is necessary for us to have a great city.
Can I say something, Chairwoman? Excuse me. Sorry. Bingo. What you said, good. It needed to be said. And I say that because keeping the optimism in what you're saying, that there is a way out and that the profession is not crashing and burning is important. You and I don't agree on everything. And, you know, I speak my mind. It's nothing new to you. But at the same time, that needed to be said because I'll tell you, we've had some conversations in this meeting where it was not presented that way, and that the profession is changing and it should change, right? We've gone from peonage, being outlawed, all the way to where we are now, and those imbalances have existed and they do exist. And the job is changing, the role is changing. And yes, there will be more eyes on what you do. And that's just the way that the job should evolve because society's evolving. But good the way you said it, that's taking the leadership perspective that we're going to accept the change, even the ones we necessarily don't want to hear sometimes, and it's difficult, but it's still worth it. And joining the Sheriff's Department is still worth it. So I want to say that, thank you.
Thank you, Al. We appreciate that. And certainly agree with everything that you said. It is changing. And I'll tell you how important recruitment has become. The president, in two speeches that I've heard recently during the State of the Union, and also last week when I was at National Police Week, where he was the keynote speaker, talked about the fact that we have to ensure that agencies are a priority in communities and that we get people to put on uniforms. So I think we all are recognizing the need, and internally, we have to recognize the needs and wants of the community when it comes to their expectations for what we do. And so we're ready to step up to that challenge and to move forward as an agency.
Sheriff, to follow up on what you said and what Al said, what are you doing to get your message across locally? I mean, it is helpful for the president to speak out for sure, but what are we doing locally in our communities to get the optimistic message, the message of change, the message of transformation out to people so that they're attracted to your agency and other law enforcement agencies?
We're getting out and about in the community. One of the things that has been a challenge for the Sheriff's Department in the past is we don't have the ability, like the police department, to be on the streets. And so we have to be proactive in the way that we reach into the community. And so you'll find our recruitment team at every event that you can think of. You'll find myself and the rest of my leadership team at every community event that you can think of. We ran the Cinco de Mayo parade. We're going to Juneteenth. We have folks that are involved in Pride. Anywhere that you can think of, we're going to be out and about and letting people know who we are, talking to them so that they can relate and see that we're just like them, and getting the message out through media outlets as well. We have a very robust communications team that is hitting Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, you name it. We're focusing on trying to be very strategic about sharing the message about the great opportunity that we have now that we have all these vacancies in our agency to bring people on board. So we're getting out and about as much as we can, Steph. And if you all have the ability to share our message, we would love for you to, I think it's called boost our messages. We have profiles on all of those media platforms to include Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. If you will boost those messages when we're talking about the good things that the Denver Sheriff's Department is doing, that will be helpful as well. And we certainly would be thankful for you doing that.
Thanks, Sheriff.
Okay, well, let's transition to more questions on staffing. Can you talk to us a little bit about where you are in terms of staffing levels? I know this is an ongoing conversation with us. So if you've got some data to talk about, you know, where you are in terms of, you know, staff against your full staff capacity, and also the kind of picture of the overtime situation. I know, you know, it's gotten particularly bad here at points, and, you know, just talk to us about where you are.
Yeah, we currently have 623 sworn positions filled out of the 875 that were authorized. So that's about 71% as a department. But when you're talking about effective strength, which means not the folks that are in the academy or those that are on military or long-term leave, we adjust that number to about 542, which is at about 62% of our adjusted effective strength. So there is overtime inside of our agency. I revisit 1994 when I think about that. When I came onto the department 28 years ago, this was the state of our agency. And through those very robust recruitment efforts, we were able to get our staffing up, and overtime became something that people weren't required to do. It was something that people began to clamor and to argue and fight over. We are hopeful that at some point that will become the state of our organization. So right now there is a lot of overtime in our organization. Folks are working 14 hours and sometimes 16 hours a day for overtime. Some folks like to do that. Some folks find it a challenge, but we try to balance out the needs of the organization versus our operation to ensure that we're not totally burning our staff out as well.
Thanks for that. So are we to assume that the typical shift is, you know, that 14 to 16 hour range?
It depends on the day and it depends on the shift as well. Sometimes there is minimal overtime. Sometimes there's lots of overtime, but we certainly try to balance out the needs of our agency as well as the needs of our staff and looking at what we need to do to keep things operational inside of the agency throughout the entire department.
Thanks. And one follow-up question. Do you have a sense or know the number, the proportion of your budget that is allocated to overtime payments? I know for organizations that are, you know, overwhelmed by overtime, it often becomes a dominant part of the budget. So just interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, our overtime budget it fluctuates based on the needs of our organization. But what we do know is that we're able to do an offset of our overtime by the vacancy savings that we have inside of our budget. So every year, the Sheriff's Department, and I say this cautiously optimistically, for this year to be included, we've met our budget. We've met our targeted budget by balancing out the fact that we do have overtime, but we have vacancy savings because of the number of folks that we don't have in our organization.
Maybe nets out. Okay, kind of shifting gears, but drawing on just people being tired and perhaps traumatized. So, you know, I know there's some good data on the incidence of officer-involved shootings being highly correlated with an officer experiencing or engaging with someone who has experienced trauma within that same shift, right? So if you have this very traumatic start to your shift, you're actually more likely to engage in some sort of violence during your shift. Is there any data that suggests that might also be true for deputies? And, you know, is there any relationship between longer shift and incidents of use of force, et cetera, that you see?
It's actually a very good and relevant question. I think with the short time that we had to respond, our data team could not put something together that we would want to share to rely on in response. But what I can tell you is that I've asked them to move forward with that, and they believe that it will become a full-scale research project and product for them. It's something that they absolutely are looking forward to diving into.
Thanks. That's very helpful. So the last thing, and then we can move on to any general discussion if there is some. We had in our annual report a three-part recommendation, which included the relationship with Denver Health. We looked at encouraging you to be fully staffed, which you are also encouraged to be on your own. But a couple of things there, and wondered if you had thoughts on our recommendations and anything you want to highlight about work you're already doing to address them.
Yeah, I thought the recommendations were good. I've actually already discussed them, not only with Chief Deputy Director of Safety Mary Dulacki, but also with Executive Director of Safety Armando Saldate. So we have taken those into consideration for 2023 operating agreement along with Denver Health, and we also share those recommendations with them. As we're currently in the midst of contract negotiations, I'm not at liberty to share whether or not they will be included in those, but what I can tell you is that they are a topic of conversation.
Okay, let's transition to additional questions from the board. Go ahead.
I have a Sheriff Diggins. Is there any data available about the nutrition of the food that you referred to, like the canteen, but then also the menu that's given to the inmates, and then any like nutrition guidelines that the department follows?
Our nutrition guidelines are set by the American Correctional Association, which we are accredited by. We actually have a dietitian which has to approve our diet in a 30-day schedule. So that is overseen by that dietitian. As far as the nutritional guidelines for the items that are on commissary, the nutrition information is available on each of the products that people in custody purchases, in addition to general items that you would see like potato chips or beef sticks. We also have some healthy food items that are available on that commissary list as well. We use a company that has a national footprint for our commissary. Their name is Keith, and they service jails from border to border and coast to coast.
Thank you. Did you say that was KI? Can you spell the name of the company?
Sure, it's KEEFE.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Stefan, did you have a question?
Yeah, Sheriff, obviously we understandably focused on staffing issues involving, sworn officers, the deputies. Are you having similar challenges with civilian employees in the Sheriff's Department? And can you give us a flavor for that?
We are seeing challenges with our maintenance staffing. We've had some challenges with our records techs and our security specialists as well. So we include in that group or in that discussion about figuring out ways to be proactive in the way that we're recruiting folks, all of those civilian positions as well. And we've been revisiting the pay for some of those pay groups. We've been talking with the city as a whole about retention and perhaps some retention bonuses to include our civilian staff, what we like to refer to as professional staff. But across the board, I can tell you that the city is looking at this because, like most industries, it's a challenge. It's a challenging time for people. It's hard to compete with work from home options. When folks can be in Minnesota and work for a company in Denver, it's hard to compete with that. So we're rethinking the way that we do business as a department, but also the city is doing the same things for them.
Do we use referral bonuses?
There could be some referral bonuses for our deputies. We do have a recruitment bonus, and it has been something that has been talked about with that recruitment committee that's being headed up by Brendan Hanlon, the Chief Financial Officer of the city, along with Stephanie Adams. So we're talking about everything. We're leaving no stone unturned when it comes to trying to figure out how to overcome these staffing challenges that we're having.
Thank you.
Other board member questions? All right. Well, Sheriff, really appreciate the time today. Thank you for your thoroughness in answering our questions. We know it was a good list this time. We will follow up with you about that, research project we've helped to start for you, and hope to engage in some good discussion on that when you're ready. Yeah, thank you again for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all for a very thoughtful discussion. Hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Okay.
Interim Monitor Crittenden, I understand that you don't necessarily have anything you'd like to cover. Okay.
No.
So we'll just do a quick bit of board administration, and I will turn it over to Al for a surprise, maybe not surprise announcement.
Well, thanks, Julia. And I have resigned from the COB. Of course, this is, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I wanted to do it publicly. It's been great to be on the COB, great experience from the time I was appointed. So it's been right at 3.5 years now. So I almost made the full 4-year commitment. But I was recently appointed to the Civil Service Commission, and I'm looking forward to joining that and continuing the work, community work in public safety. So I intend for my last meeting to be in August, probably our second meeting in August. Hopefully give it a little bit of time to find a replacement and just kind of offload everything. But the new commitment is no way I can do both as hard as it is. So thank you.
And, thank you for all of the work you've done on this board. You led the board through a very challenging time at the beginning of 2020, and, for quite some time. So thank you for your leadership and, commitment to this. It's exciting to have you on the Civil Service Commission because, the work that our board does and the work that that board does are closely related, as we've just talked about staffing issues. So really excited to kind of see what you can do there, and appreciate, getting to engage in this work with you. And I know that I'll see you around since we happen to be in the same job circle. So good for me, and looking forward to seeing you around. If any board members would like to say words, they're welcome.
Hey, Al, I just want to say also, I know how hard it is to balance your day job with all the volunteer stuff you're going through. And Julia's right at the beginning. And I know your company was going through situations where they were trying to go public, and you were very much involved in IT initiatives in connection with those efforts. And I know, I mean, that's just such a challenge and such a struggle. So I want to echo what Julia's saying. I mean, just applaud you for doing that, because that's going over and above, and it's very stressful. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steph. It's been great getting to know you too. I'm glad we leave the board in great hands.
I would just add to that, Al, I didn't get a chance to work with you much, but I've heard about you for a long time, and thank you for all of the work that you do for the community.
Absolutely, man. Glad to see you on here. Thank you.
Yes, I will double miss you. So I hope we can continue to at least interact online for a little bit in the years to come.
Absolutely. Thank you, Doctor. And excited about that scholarship named in your honor.
I mean, so many accolades for Dr. Alexander. Good job. All right, so that is very sad for us, but also good for the city. And I think that ties into a conversation that we are trying to schedule around the mid-July, July 15th timeframe with the Citizen Oversight Board nominating committee. Maybe what's unique about our board is we have an especially cumbersome and complicated process for board members to be put on the board. So good job, all of those who have recently gone through that. The process started just after I joined, so I didn't get to, I had an equally confusing process, but you know, you got some extra spice. So the nominating committee is a 3-member separate city board that works to help select board members for the COB. The idea in creating that board was that, you know, the membership selection is fair and broad in its outreach. And so, you know, the city had some goals to make sure, you know, the board had diversity, and so created this structure in order to do that. We haven't really interacted with that nominating committee in the past, and I've had some recent meetings with the committee that we both agree it's probably helpful for us to be more connected, considering, you know, we have specific needs on the board and they're trying to fill those needs. So we are eager to have a conversation with the nominating committee in light, especially of Al's resignation and April, Dr. Alexander's resignation. So mid-July for that. In prep for the discussion, I wondered if the board would be interested in developing something I've used on other boards, and I've called it a skills matrix in other places. So if you think about different board members bring different experiences, you know, we represent different neighborhoods in the city, et cetera. And so I think, and I've seen value in using a matrix to kind of highlight the gaps and opportunities we have in the board. So, you know, as one lawyer rolls off, we look for somebody who has legal experience. As, you know, a doctor with extensive research and expertise in public safety rolls off, we never will replace her, but maybe we could try. So, you know, as an IT professional rolls off, we'll look for another one, you know, so various skills and experiences, and we could have that be, you know, as soft or, you know, as hard skill as we want. But you know, wanted to get a sense of if the board would be interested in putting something like that together, and if other board members felt like there might be value in that. Larry, I'm seeing a thumbs up. Okay. Anyone disagree on that? Okay. So I can take a first cut, and, you know, maybe it's not the right skills, and maybe you've got some special skill that, you know, you really want to highlight on there that you think is your special sauce on the board, and that's great. So, you know, I'll put a basic start together, and, you know, feel free to add in, and I'll just make that a Google sheet. So
at some point, maybe we can get some community input on it as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, next, we are actually meeting with the Civil Service Commission Executive Director Murray next meeting. So that's June 3rd. So glad that you'll be on both boards concurrently, Al, because maybe you'll have the most insight of any of us. But if you don't mind sending Daniel, you know, any questions that you might have in prep, that'd be great. I know a question I have is, what is it and how does it work? Because it's something I'm not particularly familiar with. So I'm excited about just getting some basics that can inform our conversation. Next, administrative item. So we got budget from City Council in this last budget cycle to do strategic planning. And we were going to do it. And then we extended the search for the monitor, and we had some changes to board members, and we wanted to make sure we had our new board members on board. We will continue to have changes to board members, and so wanted to get a sense from the board on when you might want to embark on strategic planning. So a reminder of, you know, a few milestones. So Al will be on the board until August, and then April, remind me, you're mid-June?
In End of July.
Oh, end of July. Okay, great. So if we wanted to, work through that with this complement of the board, we could do that sooner. We hope to get the new monitor on, at the beginning of fall, end of summer. And so if we wanted to wait for that, we could do that. If it doesn't matter, we could start anytime. So just wanted to get a sense from the board, like, when do you think we should kind of work through that? Go ahead.
Would love to be involved in the retreat before I got off. I think that'd be some value for all of us, especially trying to merge kind of past experience or current experience with where we want to go. So that'd be my vote.
Stefan, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel strongly one way or the other. I think we clearly benefit from institutional knowledge of somebody like Al. I just wonder, is there some sort of balance? I mean, I don't know I'd like to see maybe if we're going to have one additional person who's going to come on relatively shortly, maybe we could, get the best of both worlds there. And I'm not sure what that timing would look like, but I would vote to strive for that if we could.
To the best of my knowledge, there's probably not going to be somebody in the next 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, the posting for April's vacancy, they have not yet started collecting applications. So it's going to be a little while after that. And then it's going to be another month minimum for the city council process.
Okay.
So
okay.
Just as a heads up there.
Okay. Then sometime this summer before,
Okay.
would be April, are you leaving at the end of July? When would you be able to participate if we had it in July?
Yeah, should be able to.
Okay.
We get together, get some dates. Yeah.
So maybe we end for the last 2 weeks in July and try and work on some dates there. So Daniel, if you want to aim a doodle poll or some other fancy tool that you can get all of these cats herded, that'd be great. Okay. Additional questions. So, a bunch of us went to the jail and wanted to ask if folks would be interested in scheduling police ride-alongs, and seeing a lot of head nods. Okay. Yeah, it helps to sort of see where the work is done. Okay, so Daniel, maybe folks can just email you with their interest and we can find an opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
Thankfully, that doesn't have to be as big a group. It could be a couple of folks with, one officer or 2 officers, etc. So, okay. Just a couple more questions. So, board elections. So currently Dr. Alexander is the vice chair of the board. And we have an annual election for existing board elected positions. So I will also need to be reelected or declined in terms of reelection. And that will be June 17th. So we will be needing a new vice chair. So think about if you're interested in that. And Daniel sent around a nice document that kind of highlights different responsibilities of the chair and the vice chair. And so take a look at that if you're interested. It's really helpful to have both seats filled because it's a lot of work. So good to have help, teammates. So, okay, so that's out there for middle of June. We have our quarterly public forum next week, and April is going to lead that for us. I have elections for my registered neighborhood organization and I have to be there, so sorry about that. And thank you, April, for stepping in. That will primarily be guest speaker Saldate, talking about the response to the 112 recommendations from the Reimagining Task Force and other agenda items there. So if there are special questions you'd like him to cover outside of that agenda, let Daniel know. We can generate a list. And I can't remember the item on confidentiality agreements. Daniel, can you bring that one?
Yes. So as I was going through some older board records, I found that in years past, board members have signed a confidentiality agreement that essentially just acknowledges the legal confidentiality obligations that the board has. It's not anything additional, but more of a confirming awareness. And I wanted to bring it up and see if that's something that the board sees value in sort of restarting. I don't know. The last I saw, last signed copy that I saw in sort of the files was from 2011. And so it's been a while. I don't know why it was stopped, but it's something that if the board sees value or would like to sort of restart that process, I can send around the old language, and we can try to make sure that everybody has a signed copy if that's what the board wants to do.
So my suggestion is maybe sending that document around and having us look at it, and then we can have a conversation. I personally always feel weird about public servants having confidentiality agreements because I work in a public sector job and most of what I do is public information anyway. So, we obviously have a lot of our work that is public, and, our executive sessions are often dealing with, in-flight process, in-flight policy, and, in-flight investigations. And so my assumption would be that that's covering mostly that, and that we won't be leaking things to the public that aren't, finalized, et cetera. But I'm happy to have the board look at that, and we can have a conversation later.
Any additional information around the stop of use of it, or why it was the intention originally, and if there was any public concern about that, as to why maybe it stopped?
I have no idea.
Maybe we ask the city attorney's office if there's any info on that. And unfortunately, all of our long-standing board members are rolling off. So this is what happens when you lose your institutional knowledge, is like, don't know. So maybe Katina knows, we can chat her on the side, but we'll do a little bit more research, but just wanted to bring that up to the board. It was something we discovered and wanted to make sure we talked about.
Although 2011 probably even predates Katina.
Yeah, it might, but maybe she was involved in stopping the signing of those later. So
yeah, it's a long time ago. Wow,
it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I think that's all we had in terms of the meeting today. Daniel, unless I missed anything, go ahead, Stefan.
Sorry.
Yeah, Daniel, you may want to raise this. I just wanted to bring to the board's attention that Daniel and I are having a meeting on Tuesday. I know he sent an email around, but we spent a lot. He and I spent a lot of time going through the current drafts of the Public Integrity Divisions, the Administrative Investigative Unit policies, and the Conduct Review Unit policies. This is a big part of our annual report, where we are frankly very critical, appropriately so, of the Department of Safety, the city attorney's office, the sheriff, who's ever involved, for not having policies in place relating to the misconduct process for deputy sheriffs. And it's been a real cluster, to be, to put it mildly, to try to get these policies in place for years. It's very frustrating. So what Daniel's going to do, I finished, we've reviewed these a couple times. Daniel's going to send our markup and comments, which are pretty significant, particularly on the CRU policy, back to everybody who's supposed to attend this meeting with us on Tuesday, so that they can get our comments in advance. And so that'll help facilitate the discussion, hopefully make the meeting, a lot more efficient, as opposed to going round and round talking about process for the umpteenth time. But anyway, that's what's going to be done today. Daniel will circulate that to the board after he sends it out to the Department of Safety, the city attorney's offices, et cetera. And we definitely want OIM needs to look at what we're all of our comments too. And then hopefully we have a productive meeting on Tuesday and we can start moving this process forward and getting these policies implemented.
Thanks for all your work on that. I know first of all, it's a confusing document. Secondly, it's not well written. And so it's quite challenging to get through and understand actually what's trying to be achieved. A goal that I might have for the meeting on Tuesday, and a meeting I'm not planning to attend, so it's a tall ask to have somebody else take your goal, but I feel like one of the key challenges in getting this finalized is that we've never had line of sight into the steps necessary to publish it. And so in addition to talking about what the policy itself might say, I wonder if we can get some agreement on the steps that we need to finalize, like how many rounds, are we going to do of circular, but then like who needs to review, what's the order of review, and how do we get to something published? I'd almost rather something mediocre is published than nothing is published at all, right? And so just wanting to make sure that we have an end in sight, considering we've been going over this for many years. So it's just a thought. I'm happy to, write something up in terms of, my desire there, but if we can agree on the process to finalize the process, I think that might help.
So that's a worthy objective and we will convey that.
Okay, thanks. And then any board members who would like to attend, we can't have more than 3, otherwise it becomes a public meeting. But if there's a second one who wants to join, we can do that. So, just let Stefan and Daniel know. Anything else on that topic?
Not for me. Daniel?
Daniel, when were you going to send that out? Because I worry about having enough time for us to review it, to answer any questions that you all might have before the meeting.
I was in the process of drafting the email before this meeting, so it will be sent out pretty much immediately after this board meeting is complete. But I think, I'll summarize sort of the general scope of things, and I don't know how much into the details we'll get on the Tuesday meeting. It is only 1 hour with a lot of different participants, but I'll be sending it out immediately after this meeting.
Okay.
So Greg, if you wanted to, we didn't necessarily want to burden you with that before the meeting. But if you want to, I've got availability, Monday afternoon. If you just want to, give us some quick thoughts before the meeting so that maybe we're more aligned on Tuesday. My Tuesday is really jammed, but I could do something Monday afternoon, but if you'd like.
Let me look at my calendar, and I'll I guess message both you and Daniel on that. And
Okay. I'd have to do sort of mid to late afternoon on Monday now that I look at it, but yeah, okay.
And I'll have to look at my calendar too, so.
Okay, all right. Thank you, though.
And thank you so much for your work on this so far. It is a big ask. Okay, well, I think, go ahead, Daniel.
Just one other thing, you had mentioned open meeting rules with 3 members, and that reminded me, in going over the open meeting rules for the visit to the jail and talking with the city attorney's office, state public meeting laws require minutes for executive sessions to be maintained as well, although not published, just in case they are challenged at some later time. And so moving forward, that's going to be part of what I send around, and what will need to be approved. We'll be approving not just open session minutes, but also executive session minutes. So just wanted to highlight that moving forward.
Okay.
I would think those would be particularly brief and would just mention the subject matters.
Yeah, we're not voting on things.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot that needs to be said, but the subject matters that we discuss, and any sort of formal positions that we might take would need to be recorded.
Okay. In the case that we took a vote.
In the case, yeah.
Okay.
In the case that something formal is, determined, such as a hiring decision or something like that. There are certain things that would need to be recorded. Pretty infrequent.
Okay. I can't imagine a vote we take that wouldn't become public shortly thereafter anyway. So no, I don't feel too concerned about that. Okay, thank you for that. And yeah, we can work on the style and depth of those notes because I know our public session meeting notes are quite robust. So, okay, well, I think that's all we have. We don't plan to have our executive session today and don't have any topics to cover. So I think we're good to go, and I'll give folks back 40 minutes in your morning. Thank you. I really
Have a
appreciate
good
the discussion
weekend.
today.